Ever get that feeling where you want to really get something, but without wading through tons of info?
Yeah, trying to find the core of it.
Exactly. That's what we try to do here. And today, we're taking a really fascinating look at how we interact with wild plants. We've got quite a mix of sources lined up.
It's a topic with so many different angles, isn't it? We'll be touching on, cultural traditions, conservation ethics, and even those everyday dilemmas about, say, picking a flower.
Totally. Our sources today range from an article on two-eyed seeing in native plant conservation
Hmm.
to a Reddit thread, the Am I the A-hole, kind of about picking flowers in public
Oh,
parks.
those can be revealing.
Definitely. We also have guidelines from the Bear Yuba Land Trust and the USDA Forest Service on wildflower ethics, some really crucial info on the dangers of non-native wildflower seeds,
That's a big one.
a guide to foraging ethically, the leave no trace principles, and even some tips for visiting botanical gardens.
So the mission today really is to unpack all these different viewpoints. We want to understand the cultural respect involved, the ecological impacts, and maybe even just why we're drawn to these plants in the first place.
Okay, let's jump right in with this concept of two-eyed seeing. It comes from Shalish Shalifo of Shalish Indigenous Plant Selections.
Right, and the idea is it's like a bridge, isn't it, between indigenous wisdom and sort of Western ecological science.
Exactly. And Shayla's background is key here. She's Sushumk, Nehia, and mixed European with expertise in both horticulture and indigenous languages.
So she really embodies that bridge herself. It gives her this unique lens.
It does. For her, plants aren't just, pretty photosynthesizers. She talks about these deep ancestral relationships, the interconnectedness of all our relations. Takim Aisnekonuklas Kalha, I believe is the term.
It really shifts your perspective thinking about it that way. Not just objects, but relations.
Yeah. And she sort of challenges conventional conservation, suggesting it sometimes misses that deep cultural tie to the land, tatmikwat.
Hmm. She talks about needing to slow down, Skenkinlek, and to really listen Kwalan, listening to the land and to indigenous knowledge holders.
And connecting that to practical things like plant propagation,
Right.
seed stratification, cuttings, divisions.
Yeah.
She sees those not just as horticultural techniques, but as ways of actively caring for Tatmikwa. It's about ensuring abundance, like a form of reciprocity when you harvest something.
Giving back. That makes so much sense. Did she mention specific plants?
Oh, yeah, kamas, for one.
Hmm.
A really important food source, takes a long time to cook traditionally, and it's tied to indigenous land care on Starunids territory.
Interesting.
And sweetgrass, she said, that was her first real cultural plant relationship,
Good.
used for smudging, for healing.
Ah,
She also mentioned sage koku, or big leaf sage, used for smudging too, but with different properties. And nodding onion, apparently a beautiful bulb that's also food. And juniper, which is significant for the Statum nation.
seeing these plants through that cultural significance adds such a layer, doesn't it? Beyond just, oh, that's a native plant.
It really does. And her thoughts on seed exchanges were fascinating too. Saving seeds isn't just about preserving genetics.
It's more than that.
Yeah, she sees it as allowing the plants themselves to pass on their knowledge, their lineage, learning the life cycle as part of it, connecting with the land's rhythm.
And connecting with people too, right?
Yeah.
Sharing knowledge, sharing stories, Nuko Santual, helping each other.
Exactly, that community aspect. And she really encourages people, us, to learn about the indigenous nations whose land we're on.
And find ways to support them, especially considering the history, like the terra nullius doctrine, that whole idea of empty land.
Right. It's a history embedded right there in the ground beneath us. So applying this two-eyed seeing, it sounds like being more present, more respectful.
I think so.
Yeah.
And actively seeking out and valuing those indigenous perspectives alongside the scientific ones, recognizing there's more than one way to understand the world.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to something maybe more familiar, that everyday question. Is it okay to pick wildflowers?
Ah, yes, the classic dilemma.
We looked at that Reddit thread, AI, picking flowers in a public park.
Right. And this really highlights that common conflict, doesn't it? One person thinks picking prevents others from enjoying the flowers. Their fiance disagrees.
And the verdict online was pretty overwhelming. Not the a-hole, meaning don't pick the flowers.
Okay. What were the main reasons people gave?
All sorts. Potential illegality, damaging property.
Yeah.
The impact on pollinators came up a lot. Bees are struggling.
That makes sense.
Also, the tragedy of the commons idea. If everyone picked just one, there'd be none left.
Right, the cumulative effect.
Yeah. And just general etiquette, Don't pick stuff in parks. Plus, depending on the plant and how you pick it, you could actually harm it.
And these are shared spaces,
Right.
planted often with public funds for everyone to enjoy.
Exactly. Taking flowers feels like taking from that shared enjoyment.
Were there any arguments for picking being okay?
A few, kind of tentatively. Some suggested maybe blossoms falling from a tree, like a fleeting moment, might be different. But definitely not digging up or picking planted flowers.
Interesting distinction.
And there was this little side note about the fiancé being vegan and the original poster wondering if that influenced her view on enjoying nature.
Huh. It shows how personal values play into these things.
So that Reddit chat, while informal, it really captures that tension, my desire versus the collective good or the environmental impact.
Which leads perfectly into the more formal guidelines we found.
Yeah, like the Bear Yuba Land Trust. Their stance is super clear. Enjoy, photograph, but please refrain from picking the wildflowers. Simple as that.
And they mentioned the legal aspect too, right, in California specifically.
Yes. It's actually illegal to pick wildflowers on public land, roadsides, even private property without permission. And the fines can be pretty hefty.
Wow, okay, good to know.
But beyond the law, they focus on the ecology. Flowers make seeds. Seeds make future flowers. Picking reduces that whole cycle.
And it impacts the wildlife too, doesn't it? The pollinators needing nectar, other animals needing the seeds or the plant itself for cover.
Exactly. They also make a good point about transplanting. Most wildflowers just don't survive being moved.
So better to leave them be.
Mm-hmm.
If you want native plants, look for nurseries that cultivate them ethically.
Right. And they mentioned a worrying trend in their area, the northern Sierra Nevada, with showy plants like Louisias and orchids declining because of illegal collection.
That's really sad. The California Native Plant Society is strongly against that too, calling it destructive. And poaching endangered species on federal land is a serious issue.
It is. Though, it's worth noting, the Forest Service does sometimes issue permits for illegal collection in certain situations. It's not a blanket never.
Okay, so there are specific channels for that sometimes.
Yeah. But the overall message, especially for casual visitors and teaching kids, is definitely that leave only footprints, take only photographs idea.
Which is basically leave no trace principle for leave what you find.
Exactly. That principle really emphasizes that everything out there, rocks, plants, logs, has a role in the ecosystem. It tells a story.
So leaving things as they are preserves that natural state.
The basics are: observe historical sites, don't touch, leave natural objects alone, don't introduce non-native species,
Critically important.
and don't build structures or dig trenches.
And for wildflowers specifically, leave no trace reinforces the point. Even a few picks add up. It impacts pollinators, reproduction.
They suggest photos or sketches instead.
Makes sense. And this principle extends to foraging too, right? Being careful not to deplete resources, avoiding rare plants, respecting indigenous gathering practices.
Yeah, and it covers other natural objects like antlers or cool rocks, and definitely cultural artifacts. Taking those from public lands is usually illegal.
And the invasive species point is huge under leave what you find too. Cleaning your boots, your gear.
So you don't accidentally spread unwanted seeds or organisms. Crucial.
So, yeah, whether it's ethics, ecology, or the law, the message seems pretty consistent.
Yeah.
Admire, don't acquire when it comes to wild plants in their natural setting.
Okay, let's shift context slightly. What about botanical gardens, managed environments?
Right. Different settings, slightly different rules,
Mhm.
but the core principle of respect is the same. Newsbites had a guide on this.
So what are the key do's and don'ts there?
Well, the big one is don't pick anything. Stay on the paths, avoid touching the plants. They can be surprisingly delicate or even harmful sometimes.
Makes sense. Keep your hands to yourself. What else?
Keep it clean. Use the trash bins. Photography is usually okay, but be mindful. Don't damage anything for a better shot. Stay out of people's way. Watch out for flash restrictions.
Right, be considerate.
Yeah, and that extends to noise levels too. Keep it down. And always check for specific garden rules about food, pets, that kind of thing. They vary.
It's all about ensuring everyone can enjoy these special places without harming the collections.
Exactly. Now, circling back to wild areas, the USDA Forest Service perspective on wildflower ethics really echoes what we heard from the Land Trust.
They acknowledge that urge, right? You see a beautiful flower, you want to pick it.
They get it, but they hammer home that cumulative impact. One flower times thousands of visitors equals no flowers left.
And they talk about the fragility, how these plants support whole ecosystems. Pollinators, birds, small mammals relying on seeds, nectar, pollen.
They specifically mention pollinators with small ranges being really vulnerable if their specific food source disappears.
Mm-hmm. And like the land trust, they're happy about the trend towards native plant gardening.
Good for habitat creation.
But they're also seeing that increase in poaching, even endangered species, sometimes driven by rarity or because they're hard to buy.
And they list those same consequences: reduced reproduction for the plant, harm to dependent animals, less enjoyment for others, and low transplant survival.
And again, they mentioned that possibility of getting permits for legal managed collection in some cases. But the bottom line is respect, protection, leave only footprints, take only memories and photos.
A very consistent message from conservation-focused organizations.
Okay, now for something that might surprise people, planting wildflower seeds. Seems like a good thing, right? Helping pollinators.
You'd think so. But this article, Good Intentions, Harmful Impact, Wildflower Seed, sheds some light on potential problems.
What's the issue?
The main problem is that a lot of those commercial wildflower mixes actually contain seeds of invasive species.
Oh, wow. Not native wildflowers.
Some might be native somewhere, but not necessarily where you're planting them. And invasive species, by definition, are non-native, spread aggressively, and cause harm, environmental, economic. They're really hard to control once established.
Can you give an example?
Purple loosestrife is the classic one they mention. It's beautiful purple flowers.
I think I know the one.
But one plant can make literally millions of seeds. It spreads like wildfire, especially in wetlands, and it outcompetes native plants, harms wildlife. It's regulated now in many areas because it's so problematic.
Yikes. And these are in seed mixes.
Sometimes, yes. Or the labeling is just inaccurate. They might use common names that are misleading, or studies found seeds in mixes that weren't even listed on the packet. Even mixes claiming to be safe for a region might contain species invasive in a specific part of that region.
So it's buyer beware, basically.
Very much so. Plus, mixed seeds often have different germination needs, so maybe only the really tough, weedy, potentially invasive ones actually sprout well.
What about things like seed bombs or seed paper?
The advice is caution. Ideally, make your own with locally sourced native seeds. If you get them as a gift, maybe plant them in a pot indoors, enjoy them there, and then throw the plant and soil in the trash, not the compost, to be absolutely safe.
So what's the responsible way forward for gardeners who want to help pollinators?
Plant purposefully. Do your homework, research native plants suitable for your specific area. Avoid generic mixes. Support local nurseries that specialize in natives. Maybe even connect with local watershed or conservation groups for advice.
Use reliable resources, like those pollinator partnership guides mentioned.
Exactly. And if you are collecting native seeds yourself, follow strict guidelines. Don't touch rare species, don't take from small populations, leave plenty behind for wildlife and regeneration, don't trample things, clean your tools, and always get permission, no trespassing.
It sounds like good intentions aren't enough. You need good information, too.
Precisely. Understanding the potential downsides is crucial.
And this connects to a broader issue, the impact of non-native plants generally on insect populations. We looked at a Yale E360 article featuring Doug Tallamy's work.
Right. Tallamy's big hypothesis is that non-native plants create food deserts for native insects.
How so?
Because most native insects evolved alongside native plants. They often specialize in eating only certain plants or plant families. When non-natives take over, the insects literally don't have the food they need.
And that decline in insects then affects
birds and other things that eat insects, it ripples up the food web. Now, there is some debate. Not everyone agrees all non-natives are automatically bad, but Tallamy's research and recent studies cited in the article strongly suggest this is a major factor in the insect apocalypse.
Wow. So it's not just habitat loss and pesticides, but the type of plants in the remaining habitat?
Exactly. It's an often overlooked piece of the puzzle. We're seeing declines in butterflies, moths, bees, beetles, even aquatic insects. Both specialists and generalists seem affected.
That German study showing a huge drop in insect biomass really highlighted this, didn't it?
It did. And the article connects this insect decline directly to bird declines, the bird Armageddon.
Why are insects so specialized on certain plants?
It's often about plant defenses. Plants produce chemicals to deter herbivores, and insects evolve ways to overcome the defenses of specific plants they rely on. Over 69% of caterpillars, for example, might feed only on plants within a single family.
So if those plants disappear, replaced by non-natives,
the caterpillars starve. Research shows they do much better on their native hosts, and areas invaded by non-native plants generally have fewer butterflies and moths.
Are there exceptions? Insects adapting to non-natives?
Yes, sometimes. But the article argues these are relatively uncommon, and the overall negative impact on biodiversity usually outweighs any isolated positive cases. Kudzu, as an example, helps one butterfly, but displaces countless native species.
And we're talking huge areas transformed by non-native plants, right? Agriculture, forestry, even our own yards and cities.
Yeah, massive areas. And think about birds. 96% of North American land birds feed insects to their young. It's critical food.
The study on Carolina chickadees was striking.
Yeah, they forage mostly on native trees and raise fewer young in yards dominated by non-native ornamentals. The food just isn't there in the same quantity or quality.
This led Salome to propose the homegrown national park idea, didn't it?
Right. Encouraging people to convert parts of their lawns or choose native plants for their landscaping to create pockets of habitat, collectively forming a huge conservation area.
And his conclusion now is pretty stark. The evidence shows non-native plants are generally detrimental to insect populations.
So it really makes you rethink your own backyard, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, finally, let's talk about foraging. It seems to be getting more popular.
It definitely is. And with that popularity comes a real need for ethical and sustainable practices, which is what the Planet Forward article focused on.
They featured some foragers who emphasized it's not just a trend, right?
Exactly. People like Patricia Curitzi-Howell and Carolee Langston frame it as stewardship, a way of life needing intention and patience, not just grabbing free food.
And there's an ethical dimension related to history and culture, too.
Yes, being mindful of indigenous knowledge, avoiding biopiracy, taking traditional knowledge without permission or credit, and acknowledging that foraging historically was about survival, and access has been tied up with land ownership, racism, class issues.
So permissions are key. Asking owners for private land, getting permits where needed, like national forests.
Right? State parks usually don't allow it.
Yeah.
And always practice. Leave no trace, fill in holes, don't leave trash.
What about sustainability? How do you forage without harming the plant populations?
Number one, know what you're picking and know if it's at risk. Check resources like United Plant Favors or state DNR lists. Don't harvest from a new spot until you've watched it for a whole year.
Observe first. Good advice.
Avoid overharvesting. The 1 in 6 rule is a guideline. Be especially careful with roots or bark, as that can kill the plant. Think about propagation. Maybe divide roots or save seeds to help replenish.
And if you need a lot of something,
Find a local grower or grow it yourself rather than stripping the wild populations. Use the right tools. Be clear on your purpose so you don't waste what you take.
interestingly, the article mentioned foraging for invasive plants can actually be beneficial.
Yes, things like dandelion, garlic mustard, Japanese knotweed, even kudzu leaves. Foraging those freely can help native species by reducing competition. They list quite a few examples.
What about mushrooms?
Sustainable harvest is possible since you're usually just taking the fruiting body, not the main organism underground. But still, be considerate of others and wildlife. So the takeaway for foraging is slow down, be thoughtful.
Exactly. It's about stewardship, connection, and deep respect for the environment you're interacting with.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, we've journeyed through quite a landscape of perspectives, haven't we?
We really have, from that deep spiritual connection of two-eyed seeing to the very practical, sometimes legal reasons for leaving wildflowers alone in parks or wild areas.
And understanding the ecological impacts, both negative, like with invasive seeds or non-native plants displacing insects,
And potentially positive, like careful, ethical foraging or planting appropriate native species.
it's definitely complex. There's often that tension between what we might want to do in the moment, pick a flower, plant a convenient mix, and the broader cumulative effects.
It really makes you think. And maybe that's the final thought for you listening right now. How can you integrate these different viewpoints? How can you personally interact with the plant world around you in a way that feels informed, respectful, and responsible?
It's about finding that balance, maybe exploring what's growing in your own local area and learning more about the efforts to conserve it. Food for thought.